According to leaked documents from the Department of Defense obtained by The Economist, a staggering number of Russian men have been killed in the conflict in Ukraine. Up to 1 in every 250 men are casualties of the Ukraine war. Just what does this mean for Russia and for the West? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about all of it. Okay, this is completely insane to me. So this is the original leak was from The Economist, right? And The Economist is notable because it's it's actually one of the news magazines or news publications whose readers have the highest net worth. It's like The Economist and the Financial Times. And so these are people who demand generally very, very good reporting. There is no clickbait in The Economist. People like even JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon is like, I love The Economist. And so it's an incredibly well-reasoned, well-written, and well-researched publication. That doesn't mean they don't get it wrong sometimes, right? Nobody's perfect, but this is not clickbait, right? And this is something that you should this is one of the top tier source of information. So when they say, because here's the thing, they got these documents from the DoD that were leaked to them, but they couldn't put the documents themselves in. That's actually illegal. So instead, they put in their analysis, right? And they published, though, 4 charts of their analysis showing, first off, that the DoD estimates between 450,000 and 700,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded in Ukraine, right? Based on leaked documents from the U.S. DoD, as well as official and unofficial sources. So one chart here actually really illustrates it well, where they say, listen, this seems about right, because as you guys know, as time has gone on, right, the number of casualties has increased. The red represents killed, and multiply the number of killed by 4 to get to the total casualty number that we are sort of expecting. And so you can see here that the most recent numbers, of course, as the war has gone on, more Russians have been killed, right? None of them are coming back. And you can see that Mediazona, the opposition outlet in Russia, as well as BBC Russia, are estimating something in the 113,000 range. Again, Mediazona's high range, about 140K. But you can see when you multiply, right, 130,000 times 4, right, because 1 casualty and 3 wounded, you multiply by 4, this is how math works, you get 500,000. So comfortably inside the estimates, right? The UK MOD putting out about 500K, as well as other sources. So this, to me, is strongly indicative that this is the real casualty number. And you can see, based on some of these charts here, again, from these leaked DoD documents, as well as Mediazona and Medusa, that Russian casualties, right, actually reached were much lower during the Ukrainian counteroffensive when Russia was focused on defensive operations. But now that they've pivoted back to the offense, particularly with their new high casualty strategy, they have begun to really take a lot of losses. You can see in Belgorod especially, right? Once they took Avdiivka, they said, listen, we're going to keep pushing as hard as we can. And taking massive casualties in a push in Belgorod, kind of a 1-2 punch. But you can see here, this is also part of their Donetsk offensive. Russian forces are just incurring huge casualty numbers. And don't get me wrong, it's achieving Putin's objective, which itself is kind of crazy. But here's where the numbers, we're going to talk about the craziest number of all. But first, I wanted to talk about, if you want to support this channel, you guys know that it's an election year, and YouTube, it's not a secret that they have a stance, right? They have a particular set of feelings that they want to push, a narrative they want to push. And I, as somebody who talks about the reality of this conflict on the ground, sometimes it feels like I kind of go against that. And so I've gotten fewer sponsors, ad rates are down, I get demonetized. And so I depend on you guys to support the channel, to help me and my team do this every single day, 7 days a week, right? And that is Combat Vet News. So we've just read on the site. And so if you want to become a member and support the channel, right, any one of the tiers, specialist and above, is going to get twice a week. We find the most viral combat footage that's fresh off the front lines. Sometimes it's as little as 48 hours old. And we do a deep dive analysis of who's fighting, why they're fighting, what's happening, zero censorship, because this is entirely hosted by me. But also now I've added, if you're in the lieutenant or colonel tiers, you get a weekly Q&A. You can submit questions, right? And I will answer them in a exclusive video. You also get the shout outs if you're on the end of the channel, if you're in the lieutenant tier, but the golden recognition and kind of a by name recognition every couple videos for the colonel tier members. So if you want to support, man, go to combatvetnews.com, become a member. The link is in the description. And you're making a huge difference to me. And you're making sure that we can continue to put out this real information here about the conflict. Now, this is the most absurd part of this whole thing. Here is a chart from The Economist of the Russian soldiers of Ukraine by age group estimates plotted as a percentage of male population. Now, again, it says Mediazona, Medusa, and UN. This level of sophistication more likely to be vetted or at least informed as well by the DoD analysis. But here's the absurd thing. One, note that basically if you're over 25, you're a Russian male over 25, they're recruited in equal measure, all the way up to men in their late 40s. But look at this, 0.4%, sometimes up to 0.5% of their population has been killed in Ukraine, right? Now, what does that mean? It sounds like small. It's 0.4% is very small, but not when you're talking about a whole country. Because look, 0.4%, right, is 4 out of every 1,000 men, or 1 in every 250 Russian men have died, not been wounded, died in Ukraine. That is insane, guys. And this is a country who already has a demographic crisis. This is when you have that scale of death in a country, particularly concentrated just in one gender, what you're looking at is a absolute panic level crisis, right? And that number is only going to rise because, again, it's a downward spiral. Think about it. 2 years ago, let's say how many of the soldiers killed in the first month of the war, right? Young Russian men, young, fit Russian men, how many of them, if this war hadn't happened, would have had kids, right? Would have at some point reproduced in the next subsequent 2 years, right? So then you take those numbers and you realize it becomes a compounding, damaging effect, right? Now, obviously, it won't show up in the next 3 years, but what's going to happen is Russia, which has one of the lowest rates of fertility, of reproduction in the entire Western world, is going to have an even bigger crisis. Now, here's the other thing. Despite this absolutely absurd casualty rate, right? Actually, the article says that about 2% of all Russian men, this is even crazier, aged 20 to 50 may have either been killed or grievously wounded in Ukraine. That's 1 in 50, guys. 1 in 50 Russian men killed or grievously wounded in this war. We've seen how Russia treats its wounded. And so this is absurd. But what's more absurd is Russia continues to bring in 25 to 30,000 new soldiers a month. This means that Russia still has sources without doing a general draft to offset these losses. And guys, if you're this is a fundamental reevaluation of the Ukraine conflict and the West in general, right? Because here's the thing. The West was like, listen, the Russian military only has so many combat troops. You kill all the combat troops and the war ends. You win. And so we gave them weapons. Ukraine did it. Ukraine wiped out an entire Russian army. And then Russia just got a new one. And they sent them into the fight. And they said, okay, well, Russia's fighting with its reserve now. Wipe it out. They wiped it out. Now, Russia is fighting with just rando dudes, just pulling men, military age men, or men in their late 40s, depending on your perspective of military age, And Ukraine is wiping these guys out. And Ukraine's getting better at it. That's the thing. Ukraine is getting better at killing Russians. But the Russians are getting even better at recruiting. But again, now they're running up against a fundamental demographic crisis, right? When you're talking about 1 in 50 Russian men who've been wounded in this war or killed, it's only going to get worse. And as it gets worse and worse and worse, one, it's going to become very unpopular. More and more families are going to have this, be unable to ignore this war, right? Because it's coming home more and more. And this is a brewing problem for someone like Putin, but he finally feels like he has a route to victory. You can see here, Russian forces advancing in easily half a dozen different locations, and they're only being pushed back near Hyalboka, near Kharkiv, somewhere where Russia's kind of said we're going to abandon. And so it is both like it's working. That's the insane thing, right? No one thought that Russia would be willing to incur this level of casualties for a war like this. And no one expected this strategy of trading your military-aged men and their lives for a couple of yards of dirt would be sustainable. Again, you have to think that for Russia, like these numbers, these numbers are like, this is the equivalent of a 9/11 scale attack every single day on multiple days a week. Like, it's insane. Putin's apathy towards his people is insane. And unfortunately, this is somebody who is obsessed with Russia's legacy and Russia's rise and Russia's desire for empire. And ultimately, he just has this fixation on yards of dirt when what he should be fixating on in the modern world, an empire isn't about the dirt that you control. Russia has like 20% of the world's land mass at baseline. It's about the people and their productivity, right? It's about the ability, to like, why can't Russia have a Silicon Valley, right? Where's Russia's tech hub? And this kind of thing is a reflection of Putin's antiquated thinking. But this is what happens when you have megalomaniacs who are in their late 70s and early 80s running your countries. You end up with this kind of just completely medieval thinking. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. A huge thank you to the Colonel tier members, including Cameron Wheeler, William Tell, Eugenia Cuesta, Makoto Mason, Anonymous, Don Mossman, Citronix. Awesome. Citron X. Bill Dwyer, Doug Beck, H. Young, Franz, Zacharias, Mark, and James Porsche. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Really, when you hit subscribe, it makes a difference. And I will see you guys in the next one. Cheers.